evening. Okay, I think Ben has said most of what needs to be said, but just first I thought I'd go over the format of tonight's debate and also the rules that structure it. So my job here is twofold. My first is to ensure a consistent quality of debate. My second is to ensure the format of the safe space policy is upheld. So the format, for those of you who are not aware, both speakers will be given 5 minutes of protected speech to begin with. They'll be followed by 10 minutes where they will discuss with each other, which one I'll try and shuffle backwards a little bit. This will be followed by 20 minutes of questions from the floor. Questions will be chosen at random. Both speakers will have a chance to respond to these questions. They'll be followed by another 10 minutes of debate, and then closing 5 minutes of protected speech each. It was agreed beforehand that you would lead the first one, is that correct? And then Milo will go second. This will apply in both instances of protected speech. This has been agreed on by all participants. Now, with regards to the safe space policy, as a Bristol Students' Union-based society, the safe space policy is active in the events run by UBJS. This encompasses the following and applies to all participants, myself, and every member of the audience. To begin with, there will be no heckling at any point. There will be no unnecessary slurs. There will be no mention of individuals or groups currently residing within this university, as it could make them targets for harassment. But by and large, I trust everybody as responsible adults to uphold these standards, and I think, by and large, we can have a very productive debate. So, oh yeah, also, if you are not happy with the way this event is run, I do take that very seriously, the Students' Union does have a feedback process, and get in touch with them afterwards if need be. So, I think that covers everything. Yeah? Right then. Without further ado, Rebecca, you have the first...
Am I staying here or am I moving?
For now, you are allowed to move around, yes.
But if I want to stay, I can.
Yeah, sure.
Okay.
Alright, assuming this is 5 minutes and not 5 seconds, put the laptop.
Yeah, I'm just a gossip girl.
You may or may not have missed the trick. Okay.
Turn my Wi-Fi on.
I've got a candle.
It's only because I don't have a printer. Right.
Are we all ready? Alright, let's go.
I struggled for quite a long time to understand how anyone could think that we could reach gender equality.
Turns out that was 5 seconds. I'm now going to count manually. You may begin. My apologies.
Yeah, so basically I struggle to understand why anyone would think that we've reached an age of gender equality. Because it seems kind of obvious to me that we're all getting shafted by crappy gender politics. But the more I thought about it, I sort of started to think that maybe the way people think about gender politics is similar to the way that people think about God. And if you don't experience it, then it's really hard to believe or see that it exists. That's not a judgment on whether God does or doesn't, just an metaphor. What's more, I think it's really hard to care about things that you don't perceive as existing, and things that don't affect you. And I think our emotional outpouring at the Paris attack really illustrates that we're kind of much more indifferent to things that don't happen to people who we feel are like us. And so we care about things that are sort of immediate and relevant to our lives, because I think human beings are fundamentally selfish, all of us. I think one of feminism's biggest mistakes is that we have been asking people to care about issues that don't affect them, or that they don't perceive to affect them. And if you don't feel afraid when you walk home at night, or you haven't been critiqued about your work on the basis of how pretty you are, or if you don't live in fear of ruining your career by getting pregnant, then I can see how it would be really hard to sympathise with that. So rather than trying to explain the inequality that women face and sort of bombarding you with a list of things that are hard for women, I'm going to try and illustrate that gender inequality exists and that it's also screwing over everyone in this room, regardless of their gender. So I kind of tried to think about the 3 biggest issues that I think are facing men in the UK today. And the ones that seemed potent to me were men's custody rights, which are pretty archaic, men's mental health, which is really pretty disastrous, and the treatment of male sexual abuse, which I think is really important. I'm going to use the word patriarchy. It was suggested on the Facebook group it should be a drinking game. Every time I said it, I had to do a shot. I'm only going to use it 2 or 3 times. It's often used to kind of scorn the feminist stereotype. But when you laugh at the idea of patriarchy, I think you're kind of laughing at a climate that allows men to suffer. So I'm going to try and use it as it's sort of intended in the original form. So why do men get such unfair custody rights? Well, I think it's because we live in a patriarchal society that sees men as breadwinners and women as carers, and we kind of deny men the right to be parents because the pay gap provides them with greater earning potential than women, and also because we really struggle to see men as carers and women as earners. So when it comes to divorce negotiations, a father doesn't stand a chance of being awarded custody. And if we close the pay gap and we address shared parental birth leave, and we work to erase the perception of women as homemakers and men as earners, then custody would start being awarded on the basis of who was the better parent, not what gender they are. And then the other thing we talked about was why men who are sexually abused are much less likely to report their abuse, and why men who are sexually abused seem to receive more of that sympathy and support. And I think, again, it's to do with the gender of politics that we apply to sex. I think our society sees sort of men who have sex as studs and women who have sex as sluts. And as such, we promote a world where it's much harder for a man to explain that a sexual experience wasn't consensual for him. And just as hard for people who listen to a man who is brave enough to talk about it. So if a man does say that he's been sexually abused, he's a lot less likely to be listened to by his peers and by authorities. And this disparity is reflected in the sentencing that male and female child sex offenders particularly receive, and it's a very clear double standard. If we try to move towards a culture that accepted that different people experience sex differently, not based on their gender but who they are as a person, then we could promote an environment in which male sexual abuse was taken seriously. The same system that fails female victims is failing male victims. Similarly, when society takes this default position of accusing a woman of lying when she says that she's been raped or sexually assaulted, it promotes this fear about talking about abuse. And if we could dissolve this tendency to accuse women of lying about rape, then and focus less on false rape allegations, then we could focus more on actual abuse, and then we'd be encouraging people of both genders to feel that they can share when they have suffered abuse.
You're entering the last minute.
I'll try and be quick. I'm going to come back to the issue of suicide and how I think that patriarchy is really bad for men's mental health, because I think it needs more time than I've got right now. So I'm just going to try and sum up by saying that I hope my focus on the ways that gender inequality affects men hasn't given me the impression that I'm disinterested in the way that it affects women. It's something that I'm enormously passionate about. But I'm a passionate believer in closing the pay gap, eradicating rape culture, and encouraging women to STEM subjects, amongst other issues. But I don't believe that you only have to believe about those, and I don't think that women's issues exist in a vacuum. I think there's a very good reason for men to join force against gender equality, and I think we have to accept that we can't fight gender inequality without being allies. And I think there's a good motivation to do it because I think ultimately men are suffering just as much from it as women are.
Milo, your time begins now.
Well, thank you for that marvellous attempt to wrong foot me. It's a fantastic opening. Most of the problems that you'll hear about, the wage gap and rape culture, these things aren't real, and we'll explain why over the course of this debate. But most of them stem from a mistake that the progressive left has made in the idea of patriarchy. Now, it's weird. It can be difficult to wrap your head around how it can be that men running everything is bad for men, and of course it is just as preposterous as it sounds. What the majority of these things come from is a sort of wacky idea on the left that a lot of gender is performance, that it's socially constructed, that there's nothing innate about being a man and nothing innate about being a woman. And the sorts of arguments that you sometimes hear from feminists about the patriarchy hurting men is based on this idea. It's based on the idea that being a man is a performance and we can teach men out of the bad things that they do. This is no basis in biology, no basis in science, no basis in fact. To get back to the question, are we living in an age of equality? Well, we've sort of gone past that, actually. We've gone past the age of equality. The pendulum has swung the other way. Men are now routinely ridiculed, diminished, demeaned, and criticised in the public square for being men. And I don't mean for their performance as men, I mean for the biological essential nature that they have as men. The idea of the patriarchy is a preposterous feminist myth. It was cooked up on university campuses by gender activists who used a variety of bullshit statistics to try to bolster, activist statistics to try to bolster the position that women were somehow an oppressed class. That simply isn't true. White women in the West are the most privileged class of people who have ever lived. And what's interesting about people who attain power and influence and hegemony over culture is how they behave when they get there. Now, one of the ways you know that women are, one of the most privileged classes ever is how their every grievance is pandered to by the mainstream media and by universities and by just about everybody else, by politicians too. And not just real grievances, and not even just the manufactured ones like rape culture and the pay gap, which isn't real, but their feelings too. Men's feelings are routinely ridiculed by precisely the kind of feminism that Rebecca Reid practices in her column every day. She criticises ads that are too saucy and too sexist. She wrote that she was fine with objectifying a man, but she doesn't agree with objectifying women. Now, it's perfectly reasonable for her to come here and to try to wrong-foot me by talking about men's rights, but reading her work tells quite a different story. And what I want to talk with you about today, what I want to encourage you to realise, is that the pendulum has swung very dangerously in an opposite direction, and feminists who are in their 30s and 40s, writing for national newspapers, don't understand what young men go through. They don't understand the situation in school, where in America 1 in 7 young boys is placed on Adderall or Ritalin because he's held up to a feminine standard of behaviour. They don't understand the struggles men are going through in education. Tests have been gerrymandered to fit the way that women learn better. Women prefer coursework, they don't test well in exams. So we've changed that. And now more women go to college, more women are graduating, women get higher grades. When a man grows up further into the workplace, there's a 2015 Cornell study that showed women have a 2-to-1 advantage going for the same job with the same qualifications just for being women. Now, to try to take this out into an abstract discussion about how the patriarchy hurts men is to ignore the reality that young men are really suffering. And young men are suffering at precisely the kind of sociopathic, ugly third-wave feminism which is running rampant on campuses. It is responsible. Is it a violation of safe space policy to criticise the safe space policy?
Yes, if you promise not to. No, it's not a violation if you promise not to swear at it. Or attack the people who made this policy. I'd like to point out actually this policy was voted in through the democratic bodies of the students' union.
Fine. I mean, I have to check these things these days. These sorts of the safe spaces, the trigger warnings, all driven by a weird sociopathic cult of progressivism. It's what gives birth to this weird, crazy feminism that is making young men's lives miserable and dangerous. Just look at York University. Say again?
Fine.
Sure. Look at York University. I wrote a story that not everybody was completely happy with. Some people said it was a bit opportunistic, but I found it hugely illustrative of what's actually happening to young men today. And the same day that York University, under pressure from feminists in the student body, the staff, and the faculty, decided they would not mark International Men's Day, an event whose primary focus is to raise awareness of men's mental health issues and male suicide, a young boy at York University killed himself. Rather than responding to that with any degree of shame, the feminists at York University have doubled down and instead decided to ban me from speaking there about the culture and atmosphere that might lead some young boys to do such things. We'll get on to more later.
Clearly much to consider, so we shall presumably find a good mutual point to start on. So, tell you what, one key underlying theory of that is gender constructed. Does that seem like a fair place to start?
Yeah, sounds good.
Okay. Milo, you have the last word, so you begin, but you do have the right to interrupt each other, although please do let each other finish each other's sentences.
Is gender constructed? It's really difficult as somebody who is very gender typical, which I am, to say that it isn't, because my experience is that gender tends to be as it's presented. But other people who have a better experience of being not typically gendered seem to feel that it is a construction, so I'm more likely to listen to that. And I think my perception of it is that gender is more of a spectrum, and you get people at different ends of the spectrum that have different sort of characteristics at different parts. So it's unlike, I think it's sort of more of a broad church than just black and white.
Okay, would you catch one?
That's not what whether gender is constructed or not means. You were talking about sexual orientation. There is a biological.
So sorry, what were you talking about?
I meant gender. I think
You
gender
meant
is a
gender.
spectrum. Sorry, to be clear, I think gender is a spectrum.
Right. Gender is not socially constructed. That is a kooky progressive myth. Gender has a
No, that's fine.
What did I do now?
Just comes the language.
I can't say kooky.
You have every right to say kooky. However, look, you may say kooky as much as you like. I would just prefer that there were points. Please continue.
You say kooky, Milo.
You said much as you like.
Gender has a biological basis. Men are born men because of chromosomal factors, and they have hormones that mean that they develop in a particular way. Now, there are people who have strange medical conditions that buck that trend. But gender has a basis in biology, and most of what you will hear from feminists these days denies that basis in biology. And it needs to do that, because it needs to tell you that men can somehow be fixed. It wants to tell you that the way that men behave is somehow broken, somehow faulty, that masculinity is toxic. That's the sort of tradition from which a lot of Rebecca's writing flows from. And what it's seeking to demonstrate to you, what it's trying to persuade you of, is that there is something wrong with being a man. And we see this when young boys are held up to feminine behaviour standards. We see it when behaviour in the public square is determined by what it's acceptable for, how it's acceptable for a woman to behave. There is a very clear brain difference between men and women. Men and women think differently. They have different aptitudes. When a feminist tries to convince you, for example, that the reason there aren't more women in STEM subjects is that some sort of mystical, patriarchal energy, sorry for mystical, what they're trying to do is tell you that gender is a performance and a construct, and that there can be no biological basis for the differences between men and women. That's insane.
I think, particularly on the STEM side, I do think it's fair to say that women, girls, are less encouraged into those subjects from an early age. Whether there is also a predisposition towards it or not, I don't know. I am not well versed enough in the science of brain neurology to know. But what I do know is that I went to an all-girls school where sciences were this bizarre thing that nobody did, and my female contemporaries weren't ever pushed towards STEM subjects. So there is at least both of those are true. If not, I don't know about the brain thing.
There's no evidence that women are being systematically discouraged or blocked from any of these courses. More women go to university these days. More women are going to be doctors.
For science?
Biology, veterinary medicine, yes, both of those things.
But what about other ones?
Well, this is the question. If you want to claim that there is some kind of, some sort of patriarchal force or some sort of sexism preventing women into going into physics and maths, you have to explain why there isn't one in medicine, veterinary science or biology, where women dominate.
Would you go to try that?
What I would like to say is that I think the same problem exists in the arts. I don't think that boys are encouraged to explore writing and drama and dance and poetry. I think it's a problem that runs on both sides.
But nobody complains about that.
I'm complaining about it right now. I think it's really bad.
But
I just like to know that we can't actually verify if nobody is saying that. I trust your individual.
You will be hard-pressed to find anybody anywhere in gender politics, any kind of gender activist, any sort of writer, researcher, academic with an interest in gender issues who is complaining that there are not enough men in any subject.
That's what I just did.
Okay, I sense we are getting towards the fine details of what people may or may not say. Let's return to the broad basis of evidence for whether or not gender theory is a constructed phenomenon. Milo, you've spoken. You may.
What do you think? So the way that I see gender is that there are lots of different characteristics, and a lot of them are considered to be gendered. So we might think that men are more sciencey or aggressive or sporty. We might think that girls are better with babies or cooking. Surely you can see that every single person is different, and my boyfriend is much better with children, fiance, is much better with children than I am, and I am much better at, I'm much more aggressive than he is. So surely all not in all aspects of life.
I don't know what she's trying to tell us now. I'm completely lost.
Do you see what I'm trying to say about all these
No.
characteristics that are gendered? Different people have different characteristics that are gendered differently.
Oh, I see. No. So what these kind of comments are trying to do is undermine broad truths about how men and women are different. The fact is that men do seem to have an aptitude for problem solving, for certain kinds, for the sorts of things that require high IQ. So now it's an oversimplification. Yeah, well,
I may ask you, is there evidence for that?
yes, it's an oversimplification, and it's not true to say that men are smarter than women. That's not true. There's the same amount of IQ, if you like, on both sides of any of these surveys, and many of these surveys are done. It's not a particularly controversial point, but the distribution of IQ is different. And the specific kind of intelligence that is valued and that is useful for maths, for physics, for astrophysics, for philosophy, is the kind of intelligence that men are good at. Now, there are other kinds of intelligence. IQ doesn't measure everything. It doesn't tell us very much about whether somebody is a good person or a good communicator, but it does tell us how good they are at problem solving, and it does tell us how good they are at the sort of information skills that are valued highly in a globalized information and technology economy. Now, there's reason to suppose that men are better at that stuff than women. There's also reason to suppose that men have a natural disposition, again based in biology, that means that they are happy, and when you survey men and women, they say this. If you give them the option of sitting in a room, tinkering with a machine, taking it apart, finding out how it works for a week, or sitting in a room and talking to people for a week, most men will choose the first one, and most women will choose the second. And that has an effect on what kinds of professions they choose to go into, and what kind of subjects they choose to study at university.
Okay.
You cannot...
Rebecca, to come back to this? Okay, so is it biology or is it not biology?
I think it's a combination of biology and how we're raised, and I don't think that we fully understand it. The only thing I would say is that IQ testing is quite outdated now. It's generally badly regarded as a science. So I think...
Well, what's said about...
Please let her finish.
No, I just say I think it's a bit of a whistly point.
Well, what's said about IQ is that it is biased in favour of certain ethnicities, sexualities, and geographies. What is certainly true, whether you like it or not, is that the globalised information economy in which we live values precisely the things that IQ tests. If you are good at IQ, you will be good at the sorts of skills, the sorts of jobs that pay a lot.
Okay, we seem to have reached the end of that particular line of argument, or if not, there will be a chance to address it later after you've had a think. Let's move to, we're actually close to the end of this dialogue session, but maybe we'll try a different question. Perhaps are feminist grievances genuine? It was suggested that perhaps they were not. Do you consider that a valid question to be asked?
If it's more on topic, sure.
When you say genuine, do you mean, are we talking about untrue, as in genuinely untrue, like unlawfully untrue, or are we talking about just generally questionable whether they're right or wrong? Are we talking about false allegations, or are we talking about...
No, we're not talking about false allegations.
I think he means rape culture and the big gap.
No, I mean, those are two good ones to go with, aren't they?
Fair enough.
Do you want to start?
We can do that.
The pay gap is not real. You can only arrive at this figure if you take all of the money that men earn and all of the money that women earn and do simple division. No reputable economist takes this seriously. When you account for the different choices women make, and whether or not they have children, women make different professional life choices in whatever profession they're in. They work shorter hours, they take longer holidays, they seek different kinds of fulfillment in life in general. They don't have that same kind of, don't have that same kind of obsessive compulsion that men do.
If I didn't have as good a work ethic as a man, I wouldn't be here on my Friday night. I'd be watching Netflix.
Well, as I say...
Perhaps one way to cut across this debate. Are these preferences women would have otherwise chosen?
I think with the pay gap, things that aren't real, unicorns, and free stuff generally. Thing that is real, pay gap.
No.
Your issue... I don't think we're ever going to get anywhere with this, but what I would say
we can get there very simply with economics.
Please let us.
My understanding of the ONS statistic, which says that women earn less than men, is that it's an average, and your issue is that it's too broadly typified average. It takes too much into account.
It's not my only issue.
Okay, but that's the one you said, so let's just go with it. Don't be argumentative for the sake of it.
Well, we are at this
Your issue seems to be that it's too averaged out, but averaging it out is the best way to understand how it generally affects people.
No, it isn't, because it confuses wages and earnings.
Okay, I sense we'd need to be economists to answer this line of thought, so let us
Well,
proceed
cut off
to...
before we actually come to a conclusion.
Okay, but that's not okay.
Why bother
Okay,
discussing
different.
them, for God's sake? I mean,
Okay.
the two big issues are the pay gap and campus rape culture. We're seeking to establish whether or not we live in a society of equality.
Okay,
Those
but
are
have
the
you-
two big issues. If we can't get down to... I mean, we're in
Okay,
intelligent
Mr. Yiannopoulos,
room with
may I stop you there for a
intelligent
second? Okay. I did not object to trying to find an answer to the question of whether or not there is a wage gap. I just felt the manner in which it was approached was perhaps not going to give us useful answers because we were discussing laws of averages amongst other things. Because many of the audience are not familiar.
Well, should we talk about
Can you suggest, perhaps, a different way of resolving this question?
what about longer hours? Why don't we talk about working harder or not?
Yes, but can you suggest we find it here now?
Shall we talk about this working harder, longer hours thing to get off arguing about arguing?
No,
That
we
seems like
have an economic question with an economic answer, and I don't understand why I'm not allowed to give it.
You have given the answer. You've said it
Well, I
doesn't
didn't part
exist.
of it, and I got interrupted twice. I don't understand why I'm not allowed to give it.
However, Rebecca has a different proposal, and these proposals both clash together, and they cannot be mutually resolved. Now, whether or not the audience chooses to believe your answer or Rebecca's is down to the audience, but between us here, it seems that the two arguments are intractable. Therefore, I suggest a different approach. Is that okay?
What I suggest is why don't afterwards we can both do a little teeny tiny blog of our research, and then people can read both the research and decide. Because we can't footnote it in discussion.
Why do that? Why are we here? I mean, why did I get the train to Bristol?
Okay, I am being motioned. I'm being motioned that we now take questions from the floor. Hopefully these shall prove more illuminating. So, what will happen? You're both familiar with how the questions are to be taken, is that correct? Very good. So, if you have a question, raise your hand and I will pick pretty much at random. Yes? Person at the back, you had your hand up first. Address it to whomever you like.
I have a question for Rebecca after Hager.
Yay!
I'm looking at it from obviously
Go a bit louder, sorry.
economical point of view from Hager. So if women are paid less, why don't more women at work? I mean, companies are only there to make profit, right? They don't care who's working for them. They want to make profit as much as they want, right?
And this is something that Milo always says, is that if women were cheaper and as effective, companies would be purely full of women. I think there's a lot of things there. It's that women don't necessarily apply for the same roles. A woman will generally only apply for a job if she is if she's 100% qualified. A man will generally apply if he's 60% qualified. So the application is like, that's on women, that's our fault, we need to go over that, but it's part of it. Secondly, I think there's the sort of undeniable truth that if we didn't have babies, then the race would die out. And so we do have to go and have children at some point, at least some of us. And that obviously takes women out of the workforce because it's quite the time suck having a baby.
Milo, would you get come back to
The
that?
question was, why, if women are cheaper, and this is what I was trying to explain, this is a conflation between wages and earnings. Because when you tell a woman, as feminists do, that after November the whatever, you're effectively working for free for the rest of the year, what she hears is, I'm paid 77 cents to a male dollar, or whatever, right? This is based on a conflation of wages and earnings. No woman is paid less for the same work as a man. That's illegal. And if they were, yes, companies would be full of them. Women don't apply for jobs at the same rates as men. It wouldn't matter. Employers would hire the women anyway because they're cheaper. It doesn't make any difference. And frankly, it doesn't stand up to scrutiny either. Because if you start looking at studies that are coming out now, Cornell, 2015, women going into STEM subjects have a 2-to-1 advantage over men going for the same jobs. Fewer women do apply, but they all get the jobs.
You've got to have had the degree, you've got to have done STEM, you've got to have the A-levels, the GCSE, and then the degree.
Yes, and when women choose to do that, they have a 2-to-1 advantage over men in the
If
workplace,
they
and they
choose
get
to
paid
do
less.
it. When they choose to do it, yes. But you have to decide, in England, you have to try at 15 if you're going to do sciences or not. And at 15, women and girls aren't encouraged to do so. So yes, they're more likely to, but the amount of them doing it is vanishing, well not vanishingly rare, quite rare.
Again, you have to explain, if you believe that the number of women in STEM subjects is too low because women are not being encouraged to do science subjects, there aren't enough women in physics and maths and philosophy, you have to explain why women dominate biology, why women dominate medicine.
Because of the girly sciences.
What does that mean?
They're the sciences that are more linked to this caring profession.
I don't think you should make generalisations like that. Some people find that kind of offensive.
Would you care to define what you mean by
I would just like to say that girly sciences, particularly medicine and vet med, there's a caring aspect to those when you're working. They're the kind of nurturing. That's not what I said. That's not fair. That's not very nice thing to say about men, though. They are the sciences that lend themselves to more caring professions.
Women are
Therefore,
more caring than men.
by caring? What do you mean by caring?
as in the more.
It's just sexism.
No, please let her finish.
Women are more caring than men.
I'm saying this. I'm not condoning it. I'm saying it's the way it is.
Women are more caring than men, is your
No,
position.
that's not at all what I'm saying.
Okay,
You're
please,
twisting my words.
please let her
Women are
define what caring is.
perceived to be more suited to caring professions.
So a woman will apply for biology because women are perceived to be more caring than men.
I mean, you made it, yeah. I mean, you don't seem to understand it, but yes.
Okay, let's take another question. You were first up, so
Okay,
yes.
Yeah, so with this
So
sort of...
are you addressing this for anyone?
Okay, just to both really. So with this pay gap myth, it seems to be, you know, that men do kind of more antisocial hours. They, you know, sort of work further away from home. They,
All dangerous and deadly jobs.
you know, sort of work in jobs that no one really wants to do, like, you know, sort of say in sewer industry
Yeah.
and sort of North Sea oil, yeah. And so, I mean, it seems that that's quite a good explanation for why there's a difference in earnings. So I'd just like to see, you know, what you both think about that.
I think...
Oh,
sorry.
Allow Milo to lead.
Men do all of the difficult, dangerous, and deadly jobs. Workplace fatalities are 97% male. Men do all the jobs women don't want to do. You never hear a woman complaining that there aren't enough female steeplejacks, or people who drive oil trucks, or people who engineer oil rigs in the North Sea, or, you know, people who get down and dirty, or people who haul feces around on farms. You never hear about that stuff because that represents a male underclass that feminism doesn't want to talk about. And it's the male underclass that keeps our society ticking. It is the people who built this building. It is the people who make sure the electricity reaches your home. It is the people who, you know, who build up the roads under our feet. Women don't want to do those jobs, and they don't care about the men who do.
Would you care to discuss the male?
I think it's absolutely true. There are a lot of unpleasant jobs that are done by men, and that is not a nice thing for them. I think part of the problem is, often if you take a job that is very unpleasant, like burning dead limbs or moving people around, it's because you need money. And because usually if you need money, it's because you're perceived to be a breadwinner. And I think this idea that you're raised, that you have to provide, you have to earn, you have to be the breadwinner, is really unfair on men. I don't think it does them any good. I think if you more broadly suggested that people have to earn, people have to provide, then it would be men who are funneled into these things less.
Okay. Do you wish to come back to that? Oh, no, we shall take another question. Let's go to the balcony. You waving in the centre.
I was wondering if you could...
Could you speak a little louder, please?
Sorry. I was wondering if you could comment on the societal hypocrisy we have when it comes to genital integrity. How with women, FGM is rightly illegal, but with men, when they have their circumcised, people have a party over it, you know, and it's done like religious freedoms and stuff. So I wonder if you could comment on how it's okay to do it to young boys, but it's not okay to do it to young girls. Why we have that double standard?
Okay, so you
I'm not massive on circumcising children at all. I think the differences would be that male circumcision...
All right, order please. Thank you.
Male circumcision does tend to take place in sterile environments by medically trained professionals, whereas, and I am slightly generalising here, female circumcision generally tends to take place in less sterile environments with less medically trained professionals. There is a movement in aid development to make a way of circumcising women that is safer and cleaner. It's not an ideal solution, but it would at least prevent the infections that come with it. The other thing I would say is that it is harder for a woman without a clitoris to orgasm than for a man without a foreskin to orgasm. So whilst...
So women are the
Hold on. No more heckling.
If that wasn't true, then a lot of men wouldn't be able to orgasm.
Okay,
And I've seen
so-
men with foreskins orgasm.
So women...
Again, one moment. This is not that kind of
What we've established, I think, is that women are the real victims of circumcision.
Do you think that?
No, that's what you just said. You know, you were given an opportunity to continue what had been a very productive and constructive theme about some of the issues that men face. Instead, you chose a perfectly reasonable question about male circumcision. And some men's rights activists call it male genital mutilation. I think it's going a little bit too far, and you made women the victim of it.
Do
Okay.
you not, can I ask him?
Yes, you may.
Do you not think that do you accept that generally more female circumcision is done in a non-medically sterile environment?
Yes or
I
no?
have no clue.
Okay.
I don't think you do either.
I think...
Actually, you have evidence of this? You're convinced of this?
I am convinced this from studies that I've read, but...
Okay,
What
very well.
studies?
So there is evidence.
Well,
But
what
the studies will be applied up.
Amnesty
But
International's genital mutilation...
Says that female circumcision happens in less sanitary conditions than men.
If you read the whole thing, that's the impression I took from it.
The impression you took from it.
Hold on a second, right. We're returning to an evidence-based debate. All this evidence will be uploaded up. Is that correct?
We don't want evidence-based debates. We can't have that.
Okay, look, evidence is perfectly fine, but we can't argue over the veracity of evidence here because there is no way of proving it. Do you accept that? Okay? Right, very good. So I'm going to continue on the scene. We'll move to another question. Okay. Let's see, we've already done the balcony, so front row.
Hi, this is to Milo.
Okay.
You keep attacking Rebecca's work quite personally, and you said that she likes to objectify men, but she doesn't like women being objectified. She actually wrote an article how she didn't like Brooklyn Beckham being called something like young, sexy, and legal, and how she thought that it was wrong that he was called that by another article. So that clearly shows that she doesn't like.
Well, I never said she was consistent, but she did write an article in the wake of the Charlotte Proudman issue, and there was a lawyer who decided she didn't want to be a lawyer anymore, she wanted to be a Guardian columnist, so she made a name for herself by complaining that a man had said she looked nice. Well, I'm sorry, love. So she went to town, publicly shamed him.
I suspect this is verging the rounds of ad hominem attacks.
I am really interested to hear where you're going there, because I don't think I read it.
In your piece, you said that if it was a man, you'd probably have laughed. Do you want me to quote it?
I'm genuinely, yes, I would, because I'm not saying you're wrong, I just don't remember writing it.
Okay. I'll find it while you're recording.
After this, one last question, just to clarify.
Yeah,
What
it
piece
was,
is this?
if I knew that a male member of staff was speculating about how I look naked, I would cause the sort of fuss that would make Charlotte Proudman look meek. If I heard a female colleague doing the same thing about Andrew in accounts, I'd probably laugh and I might even join in.
And I you are completely right. And do you know what? I think the fact that I would say something like that, I think that is really problematic. I think that shows. I'm perfectly happy to accept that's a problematic way to think about men, and I should not have said that.
One further question. I believe you've had your hand up for some time. Yes.
Hi, this is for both of you guys. Because it's kind of on topic. Is there a sexual harassment or rape culture in the UK?
Who went first and last?
Me, I think.
Okay.
Okay.
You may go first.
Nobody, and it's very important to make this point, nobody would ever claim that rape isn't real or that rape isn't a problem. Rape is a horrific and horrible problem. Rape is a terrible thing. What some people argue when they say that rape culture is not real is that what they're saying is that we don't live in a culture that celebrates and enables rape. That's my belief. I don't think that there is a rape culture on British or American campuses. We don't celebrate rapists, we put them in prison. Also, the statistics that are used to undergird this argument are radically unsound. The first study that kicked all of this off was from an adult education college, and it was 70 people who were doing an adult course, the most atypical, unrepresentative sample that you could possibly imagine to map onto millions of undergraduates. What actually is probably more likely to be the case, something closer to the right number, still not great, and certainly nothing to be proud about, are the Department of Justice statistics from the US. There's no reason to think that the UK is radically different here. They say that rather than the nonsense statistics that you hear repeated endlessly in the media of 3, 4, 5 women somehow sexually assaulted on campuses, the probable true figure is more like 1 in 50. That is nothing to be proud about, but it is not 1 in 5. It is a big difference. And we cannot help victims unless we understand the problem. We cannot understand the problem if we lie about it.
Okay. Well, probably for us to assume that people are lying, however.
Nobody in this room.
Yes, I do think that we have a rape culture and harassment problem. No, I don't think that we fully understand it properly yet, and I don't think that we address it in a great way yet. I don't think that things like Reclaim the Night and Slut Walk would exist if people didn't genuinely feel that we had a problem with rape in this country. And I think that if somebody is telling you, if women are saying, I am frightened to walk home, when somebody shouts something at me, it scares me, I don't feel safe walking home in the dark. To me, the sensible thing to do is listen to that and say, God, that's awful, what can we do to change that? Rather than saying, no, you're wrong, you're lying. Because I don't see any benefit in telling somebody that their experience, that they've experienced firsthand, is wrong.
Ben, how are we doing for time?
Well, we can take quite a few more questions then.
Very well. Okay, so... yes, you, sir.
So, just a point on the circumcision thing. So, clitoractomy in female adult mutilation is only a very small percentage of female adult mutilation.
my background is in sex journalism, I've heard very different reports on that, because for some men, having a foreskin can make it more difficult, particularly if the foreskin's very tight, can be very uncomfortable. I've read a lot of different reports from men who found that not having a foreskin has made things better, but I have also read men who've said, obviously it desensitizes it because there's no barrier for friction. So I don't think it is comprehensive and it's harder to orgasm without a foreskin, but I would say that for me personally, everybody should be keeping their foreskins, everyone should be keeping their clitorises. Let's not genitally mutilate children.
I'm sure you agree on some level, but would you object to it?
Well, you know, the funny thing is, I wrote a column saying nobody wants to live in a world of uncircumcised penises, but I'll be clear, that's because I have to suffer and most men reading don't. More of an aesthetic preference than anything else. More of an aesthetic preference than anything else. Outside the satirical context of that column, I agree with you entirely. There's a problem here with religious rights. There's a problem because we have to, we run up against not just Jewish custom, but Islamic custom too. And of course in the US, although the trend is away from circumcision, there was a time when pretty much everyone got circumcised in the US. The truth is that rather than dealing in anecdote, the data tells us, that men having problems having been circumcised or not being circumcised, jury's out. There are advantages and disadvantages to both. Some people get very upset about this because they try to equate, circumcision with female genital mutilation. I think it's a bad comparison for a lot of reasons. I suppose the bottom line is the humane answer to this. The only real conclusion you can come to when you set the jokes aside is we shouldn't be doing it.
Can I just say one other thing? One of the other really big problems is there's this perception that circumcision is cleaner, and I think that's something we could really do to work against, because there's no good evidence that as long as you have good hygiene in the first place, you need to not have a foreskin.
You're right about that.
We agree on something. Marvellous. Okay.
I knew it was going to be different.
Another bit of questions. Okay, at the corner up there at the back, yes.
This is going back onto whether gender is a constructive thing. There's no denying that there are obviously physical differences between men and women. They've also done studies which have shown that from day one, if you have a baby, if you think it's a boy, you act a bit differently compared to if you think it's a girl. So how can you kind of say that there are it's not a constructive thing if from day one there have been studies which suggest that we treat men and women differently?
Okay. Just to clarify, was that directed at anyone in particular? Okay. Well, Milo, you may be.
Sure. Nobody's claiming that that gender is 100% biological. What I said, and what I think is the scientific consensus on this, is that gender has a biological basis. It does. It is mostly biology. Of course, some behaviours and preferences, sure, there's some socialization. But one of the reasons that women behave differently when they think they're having a boy is probably that they are having a boy, because the hormones run around the mother's body just like they do the kids. And what most of these studies are actually aimed at showing is whether a woman can predict the sex of her own child. And women can with remarkable regularity. Yet another example of the biological basis of sex.
Would you care perhaps to elaborate? We've heard very much on the biological theories. Would you care to elaborate a theory of approach?
The difficulty with the social thing is that people really like their children, so they're really unlikely to hand it over to be raised in a vacuum. And the only way you'd really, really be able to tell would be if you raised a lot of children and you really fucked with their childhood in order to tell. And as I say, people are so fond of their children, they're unlikely to do it. But I completely agree. I think we do treat children differently based on their gender. I have caught myself I used to be a nanny, and I'd say to my girls, "You're so pretty, what a lovely dress." And I'd say to boys, "Oh, aren't you big and strong?" And we do it because it was done to us, and we perpetuate it, and it is problematic. And it starts from a very early age, and we all know you're very, your mind's very malleable at that age. So what we say to a child is probably more important than what we say to an adult.
Anytime you hear the word problematic, it means that science has gone out the window. Now, the reason we treat the reason we treat boys and girls differently is that they're different. Yes, we do treat boys differently. We should. And to say, just to give you some insight on, the closest we can get without carrying out some sort of, Nazi experiment on children, is we use rebus monkeys, and what we do is we try to remove all socialization possible from these monkeys, and we do things like put them in a field with a load of toys and see which one they gravitate towards. Surprise, surprise, the boy monkeys go for the trucks, the girl monkeys go for the dolls. They do exactly the same thing that human children do. And, nobody has yet, thank God, done that experiment on kids, but there's no reason to suppose that the outcome will be any different.
Okay, so I believe there is a point of consensus here that we could more productively frame this argument, if I may. So we are agreed that gender has some biological basis and that it may have some social frame. Is that correct? Okay. Should we be doing this social framing, and how we should be doing it is perhaps a different question, and I feel that may be where the real dispute lies, as opposed to the actual biological basis. Shall we take it from there? Okay, would you like to go on with that?
I think, I don't know how much experience you have of children, but I've worked with children extensively in my life, and I think when you observe them, I disagree with this idea that boys will choose trucks and girls will choose dolls. Children want to be excited, they want to be entertained, they don't care what it is, they just want to play with it, and what they really want most of them is a cardboard box. So when we do this, when we do gender children, and we do go, look, I want you a Barbie, not only are we deciding what we want to be as a gender, we're also really limiting their development in other ways as well. So I think the way that we gender children isn't just problematic in how they grow up as a man or as a woman, but it's bad for their imagination, it's bad for their development, it's bad for their intelligence.
Would you care to follow on?
We don't gender children because children are born with a sex. And actually there is a reason why it's destructive and dangerous to follow down this line of argument and suggest that we should treat boys like girls or girls like boys or go the Canadian method and sort of raise children agender, like asexual. And the reason is what happens to boys when you get to school. There's something that feminism cannot fight as much as it would love to, and it is biology, and when you get to school, boys become boisterous. They become rowdy, they want to break things, they want to fight, they want to play football. No amount of social theory is going to change that. And what happens in schools when you raise boys to female or asexual standards of behaviour is that behaviour becomes pathologized, criticised and punished in boys, with the result that now 1 in 7 boys in America is on Adderall or Ritalin because he's too boisterous. That is a direct result of the vision of the world that you were painting. Now, there's another view through this, which is to accept that boys and girls are different, that boys do have that sort of fire and creative, destructive, energetic impulse within them, and to harness it healthily, to help them to let off steam in the playground, to give them constructive, and non-self-damaging ways to let all of that out of them, rather than drugging them. Because your view of the world is precisely what the educational establishment has believed for 2 generations, with the result that 1 in 7 American boys is on psychotropic drugs.
Okay, so is that your view of the world, and do you agree with him?
I think to suggest that I'm condoning drugging children because I believe we shouldn't necessarily give girls dolls is a little bit of a jump.
It's not what I said.
Loosely.
No, it's not what I said.
The fact that more and more people are being prescribed medication rather than other things being explored is enormously problematic. You see the same problem. Is enormously unproductive. It's not a sensible way to treat a lot of things. We see it with depression. People are given antidepressants like sweets. The culture of giving people medicine rather than examining causes is ridiculous within itself. If we park that, your theory that boys go to school and get boisterous and are educated like girls and become more boisterous just doesn't make me think you've ever seen a child.
That's not what I said.
Lots of children go to school and become boisterous. It's not about what gender they are. Some children are quiet. Some little boys are very quiet and need lots of coaxing. Some little girls are off the wall. And this divide is really unfair on children.
This is your chance to clarify what you said.
I don't need to clarify. I'll just repeat what I said, which is that we can only speak if we speak in general terms. If we speak in statistical terms, we can only speak if we observe the trends that are happening between sexes and act in the best interests of of our society. Of course, there are children who are different, and any good teacher is going to be mindful of that. My contention is that boys are being systematically punished by a feminized education system that marks according to how girls learn, that punishes boys if they don't behave like girls, if they're not quiet. My contention is that boys are suffering in the education system at every stage. It starts at school, it goes through the university system where they are forced to attend consent classes and told they're all potential rapists, which we haven't got onto, which we might later. But yeah, boys are being systematically discriminated against, and, by the way, outright ridiculed and laughed at, and treated abominably, treated shambolically,
If that's
as a direct result of the sort of wacky gender politics that has taken hold on campuses in the UK and in the US. Boys are in crisis, and somebody has got to do something about it. The Samaritans just released a report that said male suicide is at its highest since 2001. Boys are killing themselves everywhere, and nobody wants to talk about it.
Okay. If this holds to be true, and it's reasonable to assume that it does, at least in terms of the statistical side of it, with regards to suicides, do you hold that that is the result of a matriarchal structure, or a patriarchal structure, or neither?
I think firstly, there's a lot of flaw in your theory about education because we see consistently a really strong truth is that girls do better in single-sex education and boys do better in mixed education. So if boys did need to be educated differently, completely differently from women, then we wouldn't be seeing that pattern. I completely agree that I think boys are really struggling at the moment. I see a different reality. I think the world is changing, and I think the fact that two things. Partially, there hasn't been a major world war conflict that there's been conscription to, and also lots of physical jobs that men were typically in, like mining, have been erased. So two of the big places where men had a really natural space that was carved out for them have gone over a few generations. And I do think that male spaces are important, and I do think that suiting education towards men is important. But I don't think that it's a result of feminism. I think it's a result of poor teaching and poor education.
Well, what the studies show is that female teachers, if they know that the boys, if they know the names of the students, will mark boys down. There's also no reason to suppose that co-education, if it's better for boys than single-sex education, is relevant to the question of whether boys are judged according to female behaviour standards. That's completely irrelevant. And as for war and as for physical jobs, that has no bearing on school whatsoever. You're talking about men letting off their steam and getting things out of their system when they're 20 and 30. I'm talking about 7, 8, and 9-year-old boys. The example, the war and physical labour thing, sure, yes, there are economic changes driven by technology that are creating problems for men later on in life, completely irrelevant to what we're talking about. And your point, again, that boys learn better in co-educational environments is completely irrelevant to whether or not boys are held to female behaviour standards and whether schooling is gerrymandered towards how women learn.
I think you've missed my point, which was that if boys were suffering from feminised education, surely they would do better in all-male education.
No, there's no reason to suppose that.
Okay, why do you propose that to be made?
Because if you were in an all-boys school, it would be more likely to be catered towards male education.
Okay. Right. We seem to have pretended that line of argument. So, another question? Another question. Okay. Let's see. Pretty much covered that side extensively. Sorry, Wendy, you have a question.
Yeah, okay.
You can go last.
Okay, yeah.
Sorry, but it's your
Yeah,
part.
cool.
You'll get the after party as well. Okay.
We're not talking more at the after party, are we?
There'll be plenty of drinking. Yes.
That I can do.
Hi, I have a question for Milo. At the very beginning of the debate, Rebecca mentioned about slut shaming and how a woman who sticks around has a lot of casual sex is considered slag or slut, whatever you want to say. And when a man sticks around, he's suddenly a lesbian or a player.
Yep.
And I wanted to know what you thought about that, Milo, and if you thought that was a gender equality issue and whether that's something that should be addressed.
I think it's more an issue, really, of courtesy. It's not particularly nice to call people names. But one thing I will point out is that every decade since the Second World War, women have been getting more and more unhappy. And they've been getting more and more unhappy in the UK and the US. Every study says so, whether it's WAM or any of the other humanitarian organisations, everybody reports that women are getting more miserable all the time. Women are getting unhappier every decade. This cannot be entirely unconnected to the changing role of women in society and changing female behaviours. If, as I would say, feminism encourages women to behave like men, it says you can burp and fart, you can get fat, you can sleep around, you can do whatever you want, your self-esteem should be nothing to do with what a man thinks about you, you can be Lena Dunham and you'll be happy, that's a lie. It's a lie. Women aren't happy like that. And women have been getting more and more miserable since the Second World War as they've started to ape male behaviours like promiscuity. Slut shaming isn't an equality issue, it's an etiquette issue. But I have to say, if you want to stop slut shaming and let women behave, let women sleep around, that's their business. But doing that is making them miserable.
Okay. Order, please. Order, please. Thank you.
I guess first of all, if casual sex is making you miserable, you're doing it wrong. Because good casual sex should make you very happy. I think what I would say about the issue that women are getting unhappy, women are more likely to be asked about whether or not they're unhappy. The amount of surveys done about people's happiness has increased enormously since the Second World War, and the sample sizes have increased, and the amount of times that women are included has increased. So it's a really, really iffy kind of survey.
But that doesn't explain why the happiness is going down.
Please let us finish.
What I'm saying is people weren't being asked, and they asked more and more and more. And also we're much more encouraged now to think about our happiness and to assess our happiness. And we have higher standards, we expect more from our lives, people are much less likely to settle now. And there are problems in that, because you do set yourself up to be less happy. But also, in being unhappy, you're living a much more varied, interesting life. And, being able to accept that you're unhappy sometimes is part of a healthy range of emotions.
Before we proceed with further, does either of you have any statistics on whether men's happiness has increased or decreased?
Men's happiness, I'm not able to give you the citation, but if I remember correctly, men's happiness has been relatively static across the whole gender, despite the fact that male suicide is going up.
What I've read is that, what I've read is in connection with suicide and mental health, and has shown that it's steadily gone down. So maybe we're getting less happy as a humanity.
I think one of the...
Sorry, can Chris come back?
The correlate between which?
Have they related in their decline of happiness?
I've never seen a study that compares them both. I've seen ones that say female less happy, and I've seen ones that say men are less happy.
Okay, so that was entirely from my neurotic interest.
One of the reasons that male unhappiness may not be plummeting in the way that female unhappiness is men going their own way, or what I call the sexodus. Women in their 30s when they're single, and some people in this room are not going to like this, and I'm sorry in advance, but women who are single in their 30s don't deal very well with it. They tend not to be very happy. They report themselves very unhappy with life. They report themselves very depressed. They're far more likely to consider and to attempt suicide. Men in their 30s who are single aren't so miserable, or at least don't become so abruptly unhappy when they hit 30, because men tend to deal better with being alone. Men retreat into porn, into video games, or into each other's company. Sometimes it's sports, sometimes it's some other kind of hobby. And you should read a great feature on this by Martin Daubney, former editor of Loaded, in the Sunday Times magazine, which is hardly a men's rights activist publication. A couple of weeks ago, it was the cover story in the Sunday Times magazine about men going their own way, and I wrote about this a year ago. I called it the sexodus. Men were simply checking out of relationships. They are bored of being, lied about and laughed at by sociopathic feminists on TV. They are sick of, weird allegations of sexual harassment and worrying if they approach a woman, they're going to get accused of being a rapist. They are bored about, of being held up to unrealistic standards by women who never seem to be happy. Feminism is one of the great triumphs of our civilization. The fact that women got equal rights and the vote and equal access to education is something we should be hugely proud of. It hasn't happened in most of the world, but women still aren't happy. In fact, they're getting more unhappy, and a lot of men are thinking, well, if there's not, and I guess this is what a lot of married men would sympathise with. Well, look, if I've done all this and you're still not happy, I give up. So there is a huge trend toward men simply checking out of relationships, and this is not just 2 or 3%. This is not just dorks or man babies or nerds or gamers. This is ordinary, nice, athletic, attractive, regular guys who are giving up on girls in their thousands. Yet another example of how social change driven by feminism hurts women the most.
Just out of interest, is that a statistic on divorce figures, or is it a statistic on men who said, I'm checking out of this relationship?
It's men who have decided to check out of romantic relationships with women. They are not interested in pursuing relationships with women because, this is a sort of man-woman thing, right? Men actually do cost-benefit analysis quite often. It can seem a bit cold, but, men are like, is it worth it to me? Like, if I do this and I get this, great. Like, if I get married, I'll get plenty of sex, but no. Men do those kind of cost-benefit analyses. Women very often are a little bit more feelings-led. Some of you in the room won't like that observation. I think it holds broadly true. Men have done the cost-benefit on relationships these days and found women lacking. They have found women do not offer a good deal, if you want to put it like that. So they're checking out.
All right, okay. Those options. Milo, you had some time to talk there, so do you wish to come back on that?
Sorry for how that was phrased, but you know.
It did violate
so
social
much wrong with that. I don't know where to start.
Okay.
I don't think that any of what you said was true. I think that the article you're referring to, the Martin Daubney, it's not a representative sample of men.
Read it.
Yeah, I don't like it, but I read it. He's not a very nice man. He wrote about men who were pursuing relationships because they have done exactly what Milo said and cost-benefited it and said it's not worth it. They're not representative men in general. I imagine that I imagine most of you at some point would like to be in a relationship with another human. I understand this culture of fear that's driving this men go their own way thing. And I think one of the really big problems, one of the things you'll hear a lot of the men who do identify with that say is, and there's been a couple of articles, one in the Tab recently about this, I'm too scared of false rape allegations to have sex with a woman or to go out just in case. It's really sad that people feel that way. It's a very clear indictment of how badly exaggerated false rape statistics are. It's pretty well documented. There was a really great 2012 study by QC, which was from the Crown Prosecution Service, about the scale of false rape allegations and real rape allegations. So these men who are pursuing it are victims of their own community, which spews this very hateful stuff about women, and it's making them feel that they shouldn't be in relationships. And that's really sad, because one of the great joys in life is to be in a relationship with somebody who you love and who loves you.
You wish to come back on that?
Yes. No, the reason that men are worried, everybody on a campus these days knows this. I spend most of my life either in my living room writing or on campuses, so that everybody knows who spends time in universities in the UK and in the US, which everybody knows.
To clarify, we can't verify that everybody.
It's called a soft quantifier. It's perfectly well understood in logic. It is generally understood. If you actually spend time on campuses these days, you know what men say. Men say, the widening definition of sexual assault done by universities after pressure from progressives and feminists, the widening of the classification of sexual assault to include unwanted advances, makes them feel awkward about approaching women. If you approach a woman in a nightclub and she turns you down, that is, according to the sexual harassment policy of most British universities, and all the Russell Group universities, sexual harassment. That is insane. Completely mad. But that's exactly the sort of thing that that I'm talking about when I say that men are being led down this path where they're terrified to approach women, so they just give up. To say that to blame men having some sort of hateful mythology about false rape claims, please. If there is anybody guilty of perpetrating an atmosphere around false rape claims, it is progressive journalists. It is journalists like you. It is journalists.
Hold on a second.
I said like you. It is journalists who wrote about the Duke lacrosse rape case, which did not happen. It is journalists who wrote about mattress girl Emma Solkowitz at Columbia University, which in all likelihood did not happen. Paul Nungas is now suing Columbia. It is journalists who wrote about Jackie at UVA, which did not happen. If there is a reason that men are worried about fake rape claims, feminists are responsible for that.
Do you believe that?
Can I say what would really help with this worry about false rape claims would be those lovely consent classes?
No, they wouldn't.
Because
That's a different topic. You may continue to elaborate on that.
Can I just quickly say that?
Yeah, sure.
I think that if you are frightened of making a false rape allegation, going to a consent class is quite a good way to have it explained to you in terms you can understand.
How not to rape.
Whether or not you agree with it, it's really good to have all the information about what
About
to
how
get
not
you
to
in
rape.
trouble.
Do you think boys
Please
need
let
to
her
be told how
finish.
to rape?
Well,
Please
if
let
they
her finish.
didn't need to know how to be told not to rape, people wouldn't get raped.
No, that's not true. The suggestion underpinning this is that men exist on this spectrum, that there is toxic masculinity, that if it is allowed to burst forth because it has been inadequately curtailed by the matriarchy, that it can turn into rape, that somehow there is a spectrum on which touching turns into rape. It doesn't. Rapists don't look like everyone else, rapists look like rapists. almost all
What does
rapists.
a racist look like?
Almost all rapists fall into very specific categories. Almost all of them are repeat offenders. You will not encounter. There is no rape epidemic on campus. And to tell boys that they are all potential rapists by making consent classes mandatory. And by the way, in these consent classes, you won't just hear "make sure she's okay with it." You'll hear you'll hear that there is a patriarchal conspiracy to hold women down. You will hear that straight white males need to be aware of their privilege. You will hear that all sorts of extraordinary broadenings of the definition of sexual harassment and sexual assault.
That's just
To
not
the
true.
point.
That's not true.
You'll get a chance to.
I sit in these classes and I listen to them, and I've listened to them here and in the United States, and that is precisely what they say. And if you go to these classes, you will hear a variety of toxic feminist myths spat out at the boys in the class, and they are expected to sit there and listen and be told that everyone in the room is a potential rapist. Rape is not a spectrum. You cannot tell somebody not to rape. No rapist is going to not rape somebody because you said, don't rape.
Okay.
I think
There are a few
Rapists do not attend consent classes unless they are mandatory, and if they do attend them, that is not going to stop them raping a woman. I refuse to believe that a single rape has ever been stopped by a consent class. The idea of it is preposterous.
Okay, there are a few things in that. The content of these classes and also the definition of sexual assault. Come back and let whichever way you please.
I think that we clearly have very different examples of these classes. What I would say is that the good ones that I know of, have read the notes from, been to, are not saying all men are potential rapists. They're saying all people have the potential to sexually assault somebody else. And when the woman at there was a woman at Oxford, she the head of diversity, and she had to step down because she had I'm a little bit sketchy on this. A woman was recently defamed because she had sexually assaulted another woman in a club, and she had been talking about consent. And so it is not just men who are making these mistakes, but at the very least, if you are a self-protecting person, go to a class, hear what's happening, understand what it is that can get you in trouble, and don't get your life ruined by doing it.
I think people's lives are being ruined when they are scared into running terrified from the opposite sex. And
I agree, it's sucks to be a woman when that happens.
If you take the view that these consent classes could be useful in turning a rapist into a non-rapist, which I find preposterous, then I suppose you're entitled to that view. But they should not be mandatory. You should not be forced. You should not be forced to proclaim that you will not rape anyone ever. Promise, honest. I know that I'm probably like a rapist if I let myself out. This evil animal, inside me. I promise I'm going to be really careful. I'm not going to rape anyone. I'm not going to rape anyone for 3 years. People aren't allowed to graduate without going through these humiliating rituals, and it is not just humiliating ritual, it is directed at men. These things are primarily directed at men. The vast majority of these things are not about, some lesbian who got drunk and had a fumble, right? Okay. This is not what it's about.
Some lesbian who got drunk and had a fumble.
What's offensive?
It's like,
what? What's offensive about some lesbian who got drunk and had a fumble?
Well, what starters, you don't know her sexuality.
Yes, I do know her sexuality. It was with a girl. She said so herself.
That
doesn't make her a lesbian.
Alright, fine.
Have you finished your point?
I give up.
Can I just come back on what you said, which is that your perception seems to be that they're pointless because a racist...
It's like that, those reports that...
Please let us finish.
Not all women menstruate or something. This is crazy things.
You may finish then.
Yes. Your issue seems to be that they're not going to... Well, one of your issues seems to be that they won't stop a rapist from doing raping.
Not one.
A rapist is not a type of person. You have no idea. You genuinely don't know what it's like to be a young woman, especially a young woman who was very recently at university. The number of men who didn't understand that if you pass out, you can't consent. That trying to stick their hand into your underwear in a club doesn't have consent. These are the kind of things that young men really genuinely don't, or young people, really don't seem to have been told. And what George Lauder wrote is that any intelligent person would know this. And I wish he was right, I really do. It would be a happier world if they did. But they clearly don't, because it happens again and again and again.
Okay, so it's time to move on from this question, I'm afraid.
One question, then final.
One more question, and preferably on a different topic. So, let's go once more to the balcony. Yes.
Yeah, I'll just say, if already it is illegal by law to pay a man more than a woman
my mind, and that's what you meant, but it's not in my mind. What I would do about the pay gap would be, there's been a movement to publish more widely statistics, the figures of what people get paid.
But it is already illegal.
Do you want to hear me talk, or do you want to talk?
Hold on a second. It's an entirely valid point to make. Sir, could you please allow us to finish?
Companies like Barclays, which have a very well-developed structure, do their payment in bands, and they go from 1 to 9, and there is a set amount that you can be paid within each band, and you find out what band each person is in, which means that you're never in any doubt about whether you are being paid less than a colleague. The other thing is, one of the big reasons for the pay gap is that women are not good at going and saying, I'm really good, I want a pay rise. So we need to encourage women to go and say, I need a pay rise because I'm worth it. And that is a big issue that women need to deal with themselves.
Then how do you see it changing, apart from just constantly talking about it constantly? And saying...
Constantly talking about it constantly?
That they're oppressed, and not being things as their male colleagues. You need to actually go to these women and say, don't tell them all this nonsense. Go to them and say, if you are suffering, if you are not getting paid the same as a man, go to your employer. Don't arrange help.
Take him to court. I mean, you'll
actually
win.
take them, tell them, you can go to your employer. We'll help you find them, get the payment, and to your employer, get them to pay you more. Fund them, give them a legal fees.
So you're suggesting that I should go to every woman in the UK and give them a legal fee?
I don't want to let her
please,
about
you
people in
do have
the
to
audience.
finish.
It's sarcastic and glib and patronising. When people are asking serious questions, it's really disrespectful.
Okay, so how much time do we have? Oh, not long. We'll move to closing statements now because this was very much a debate anyway. What was the agreement? You would do it first?
You're going last.
Okay, very well. You have 5 minutes. Is that okay, Ben? 5 minutes each?
Yeah.
Please, Chris.
I want to use the 5 minutes to pick up on some stuff I didn't get time to say in the first place. I think I've said a lot so far. And the thing that I wanted to talk about was male suicide, which is something that I feel really, really strongly about. It's something that has directly affected my family and something that I take incredibly seriously. And so why is suicide the #1 cause of death in men between 20 and 49? It's really, really hard to talk about it because every single case is specific and I don't want to brush over it and be disrespectful. One thing I will say is that I think mental health provisions for all genders in this country are woefully lacking, and that's something that needs to be addressed separately. But the big takeaway I want to leave from what I've said this evening is that I really believe that the way that we handle gender politics are disservicing both genders, and I care about both genders. Being raised in the understanding that big boys don't cry is one of the first ways that male emotions get squashed, and it's a pattern that continues all the way through their lives. This expectation that you shouldn't cry, you shouldn't have feelings, you should squash it down because you're a man, is so poisonous. The flip side of that is when a woman is told to calm down when she's upset, and when girls are told to sit quietly and to be ladylike. And it has different effects, but I'm asking you if you can understand the effect that it has as a man to try and comprehend, or try and be sympathetic to the effect that it has as a woman. We are stripping both genders of their right to have ownership of their feelings. Women of anger, aggression and assertiveness, men of more typically female emotions, and particularly of the right to cry. Women are not more emotional than men. Men just aren't allowed to express their emotions honestly. And women's emotions tend to get conflated with hormones and hysteria. The number of people when I'm angry who ask me if I want my period is absolutely obscene. One of the worst things about it is that we need to understand that the hormone rush comes before your period. So you don't have your period, you have PMS. If we start to understand that humans, they are designed to feel a range of emotions, a whole spectrum, and that none of those emotions are to be squashed or to be denigrated, then we can start to carve out a world in which men are not expected to feel in a certain way. And I genuinely believe that one of the reasons that men's mental health is so poor in this country is this macho idea that men shouldn't have feelings. And the reason that I wanted to spend this evening talking about the way that patriarchy, and yes, I'm going to say patriarchy again, affects us is because I believe that it's not just affecting us when we walk down the street having shouted at us, it's affecting people's lives and it's causing genuine trauma to people. So what I would ask people to do is to try and reflect on the way that society's gender ideas affect their life, whether you're male or female, but then if you can understand how it affects your life, try to think about how it affects the opposite gender's life as well, because it's really important that we try to start listening to each other. This battle of women versus men, feminists versus men rights activists, it's getting us nowhere. We can see that there are very real issues that need to change, and rather than fighting, why don't we try listening to each other and seeing if we can actually solve something?
Thank you. Milo, your 5 minutes begins.
I want to address the men in the audience. Sorry, ladies. I love you, but this is for the boys. The question posed to us today was whether we've reached an age of gender equality. I don't think we have. We've overshot the age of gender equality by a long stretch, and men of your generation are going to be the primary victims of this error. In secondary school, you will have experienced a system that is tilted against boys. Your exams will have been primarily modular, not linear, a system that favours girls. Teachers will have tried to control and pathologise your boisterous behaviour, branding you young offenders for pranks or cyberbullies, for typical male teenage trash talk. Taunting, after all, is how men bond. Your female peers will be encouraged at every stage of their educational journey. They will be told to join a STEM field. They'll be showered, in fact, with grants and awards, prizes and encouragement. And then when they do get to applying for those jobs, you will be discriminated against just because they're a girl. You'll be the recipients of nothing. There are no programs for men. The suggestion of having a men's officer at York University was laughed at by the student union. At university, you will be told that you're rapists in waiting, that you need to attend consent classes. Your natural love and affection for women will be neutered. You will be faced with an impossible choice: suppress your natural, healthy romantic interest in women or risk a charge of rape or sexual harassment. If you speak out against this hostile and unfair environment, you will be persecuted by rabid mobs of politically correct lunatics, as well as the full force of the establishment media as well. When your studies are completed, you'll enter a jobs market that is stacked against you. With companies pressured from all directions to hire women, you will be at a 2-to-1 disadvantage if you are in STEM subjects, and possibly worse in others. If you do happen to land a job, a single inappropriate remark or a single accusation of an inappropriate remark or any unsubstantiated allegation can destroy your reputation forever. Despite all this, I'm not worried for you, because you're men. Your incalculable, intolerable, impossible obstacles have been placed before you precisely to overcome. And overcoming is what men do best. It's in the nature of men to battle on under impossible odds. We do that in war, we do that in all sorts of things, and we will do it here. Throughout your education, you will have been fed a grim history of what men have done through the centuries. You'll be told that straight white men are worse than the Nazis. You'll have been told nothing good about your sex, your race, or your orientation. But I'm going to tell you something good, and it is, if the patriarchy exists, women should be grateful for it. It is what took us to space. It is what builds roads. It is what built the internet. It is what protects and provides for women. If it exists, thank God it does. With their strength and determination, men have tamed the wilderness. Men built cities and walls around us. They built the buildings that we're in. And their curiosity led us to explore the oceans. Their ingenuity has allowed us to reach the moon. And whenever, feminism rises up and tries to ridicule you, to demean you for what you are, and, it's interesting, I was going to talk at this university, right, and I was called by my interlocutor a troll. She said it would demean the institution to have me here. When she talked about a Sunday Times article by a respected journalist, she sought to demonize him, even though he's not here to defend himself. She said Martin Daubney was a bad person. Martin Daubney is a close friend of mine. He's a great person. He's spent the last 5 years of his life advocating for the rights of men and boys. But this is what they do. Don't pay any attention to it. Don't listen to it. We're not in an age of gender equality. Straight white women in the West are the most privileged class in the history of our species. But you'll be fine.